Beneath the waves, animals move without heads, without eyes, and often without a clear front or back. Yet they are among the ocean's most successful survivors, from shallow tide pools to the abyssal depths of the ocean. Sea stars, sea urchins, and sea cucumbers are familiar sights, but they're part of a much larger and stranger family than most people realize. Echinoderms share a common body plan, yet include some of the ocean's most unusual animals. Today, we'll walk through the major classes of echinoderms, from plant-like filter feeders to long-limbed brittle stars, and see how they all fit together. Echinoderms are animals in the phylum Echinodermata. This name comes from Greek, meaning hedgehog skin. At first glance, that might seem a strange choice for animals like sea stars and sea cucumbers, which don't appear particularly spiny at all. Historically, that name was first applied to sea urchins, animals where the spines are impossible to miss, before later being expanded to cover the entire group. Echinoderms are in the superphylum Deuterostomia, so let's actually start here. The defining feature of deuterostomes actually occurs as an embryo. The first opening develops into the animal's anus. This is in contrast to the protostomia, the group that includes arthropods and gastropods, where their mouth develops first. From a human perspective, perhaps the most interesting thing about the deuterostomes is that it also includes the chordates, vertebrates, tunicates, and lancelets. This means that we are more closely related to sea stars than we are to insects. It is still a very distant relationship, but we do share this quirk of embryonic development. The second group in deuterostomia are the hemichordates. This includes the worm-shaped solitary acorn worms and the colonial filter-feeding terebranchs. Despite their rather simple appearance, the hemichordates are of great interest to scientists studying the origin and development of chordates due to their close relationship. Finally, we reach the echinoderms, which are most closely related to the hemichordates. Echinoderms include many different animals: sea stars, sea cucumbers, sea urchins, sea lilies, and many others. Like all of their close relatives, hemichordates, vertebrates, and even the protostomes, echinoderms start life as bilaterally symmetrical. That is, they can be divided into two roughly identical halves. While most of their relatives retain this symmetry into adulthood, echinoderms do not. Instead, they develop a different type of symmetry, known as five-pointed radial symmetry. This is most clearly seen in sea stars. The classic sea star has 5 arms arranged around it, rotating around a central point. This is essentially how radial symmetry works. Other echinoderms, like sea stars with more arms, or sea cucumbers, or sea urchins, all share this underlying body plan, even when it is not immediately obvious. For example, sea cucumbers do look bilaterally symmetrical, more like an eel than a sea star. But their feet are arranged in 5 distinct rows, and internally their body is divided into 5 equal sections, all examples of 5-pointed radial symmetry. Embedded in their skin, echinoderms have a type of skeleton formed from plates of calcium carbonate. These plates, known as ossicles, can be fused into a hard shell-like structure, as seen in sea urchins, or can be joined by muscle and cartilage, similar to joints in vertebrates, providing much greater mobility while still offering protection, as can be seen in sea stars. Echinoderms also have a unique hydraulic system, known as a water vascular system, used for movement, gas exchange, and waste removal. The exact structure varies depending on the group, but in most species, water enters the body cavity through a specialized opening known as a madreporite. As the water moves through the animal, specialized muscles control the water pressure inside different parts of the body. Complementing the water vascular system are the tube feet. Despite being called feet, they are actually tools with many different uses. Echinoderms lack 3 major organ systems found in most other animals. They have no heart or circulatory system, they have no kidneys, and they have no lungs or gills. Instead, tube feet, in conjunction with the water vascular system, perform all of these functions. Their tube feet have thin walls, allowing oxygen to diffuse from the surrounding water into the echinoderm. In the other direction, waste products like ammonia freely drift out of the animal through the tube feet, directly into the sea. The tube feet can be extended, retracted, or bent, using their muscles and the water vascular system, allowing for movement or suction depending on the species. Almost all echinoderms have distinct genders, being either male or female. This is not universal, however. A few species are known to be some type of hermaphrodite. The starlet cushion star, for example, is a sequential hermaphrodite, meaning they start life as one gender before transitioning to the other as they get older. In the case of the starlet cushion star, they are all born male, but later become female. Roseflower urchins, on the other hand, have populations with males, females, and hermaphrodites all occurring together. These hermaphrodites are simultaneous hermaphrodites, meaning they have male and female reproductive organs at the same time. But examples like these are very much the exception and not the rule. Most species have separate males and females. When reproducing, echinoderms usually synchronize their activity into a type of breeding season, often linked to the phases of the moon. Most species release the eggs or sperm into the water where they mingle together to be fertilized. The fertilized eggs develop into free-swimming larvae. They are usually planktonic and swim using beating bands of cilia. When they are ready, they settle onto the sea floor and undergo metamorphosis to develop into the adult form. Echinoderms are incredibly diverse, so while this is the typical life cycle, there are differences in many species. Many brittle stars, for example, will fertilize their eggs internally. The males release sperm into the water, but instead of releasing their eggs, the females will draw the sperm into their bodies to internally fertilize their eggs. A number of species also brood their eggs. Antarctic starfish, for example, deposit developing larvae into their body cavity before giving birth through their mouth to allow them to settle on the seafloor and metamorphose. This is believed to be an adaptation to the cold waters and harsh conditions to ensure the survival of as many offspring as possible. Many echinoderms can also reproduce asexually. This can happen in various ways. At least one species is capable of parthenogenesis, the process of unfertilized eggs becoming viable embryos. In fact, no males of the grain sea star have ever been found, so it can only reproduce using parthenogenesis. Other species of echinoderms are capable of other types of asexual reproduction. A common type happens among the larvae of many different echinoderms. They are able to split off part of their body, which can then develop into a new larva, essentially creating a clone of themselves. Cloning is costly to the larva, so is usually only done when resources are plentiful. Interestingly, sand dollar larvae have been shown to do this specifically when they detect dissolved fish mucus, indicating that it might be a type of protection from predators. Most sea cucumbers are capable of a type of asexual reproduction known as transverse fission. This is where they split themselves on their width, creating an identical clone. The two sea cucumbers each regenerate their missing organs over several months. Another well-known phenomenon among echinoderms is autotomy. Sea stars can break off their own arms, leaving a little of the central disc attached. Both body parts then regenerate, creating two genetically identical sea stars. Many animals have a method of asexual reproduction, even in relatively complicated animals like lizards, sharks, and birds. What makes it particularly remarkable in echinoderms is the number of different types used by different species: parthenogenesis, autotomy, and transverse fission, among others. Many of these are enabled by the echinoderm's ability to regenerate, regrowing limbs, and even their own organs. They do typically require their central body to be intact to regenerate, but even this is negotiable. The mottled Lynchia, for example, is famous for its regenerative ability, capable of regrowing an entire sea star from just a fragment of its arm. So where did this fascinating and diverse group originate? The answer is not entirely clear, but it was very early in animal evolution. The oldest universally accepted fossil of an echinoderm is from the early Cambrian period, around 520 million years ago. This was only shortly after the Cambrian explosion, around 538 million years ago, a time when life underwent a massive diversification over a relatively short period of time. There are older fossils of potential echinoderms, however. These fossils lack certain traits found in later echinoderms, so their inclusion in the phylum is often debated. They may be proto-echinoderms, that is, a stem animal from before all the characteristic traits of echinoderms developed, or they may even be unrelated animals that show some echinoderm-like traits. From this rather ambiguous origin, echinoderms would go on to dominate the fossil record of many periods of Earth's history. The ossicles, those calcium carbonate plates that make up their skeleton, readily fossilize, giving them good representation across the fossil record. One of the most important events in their evolution occurred during the time of the dinosaurs. Known as the Mesozoic Marine Revolution, this was also the time of an intense arms race in the shallow seas. Many predators, and especially marine reptiles, were developing feeding strategies to prey on shelled animals. In response, echinoderms and mollusks started developing new defenses or exploring new niches, allowing them to avoid this predation. One key example of this arms race is the sea urchins. During this period, their skeletons grew increasingly robust, with interlocking plates, and their spines grew larger and stronger. Other groups completely changed their distribution patterns. Sea lilies were once common in the shallow seas that dominated this time period. But as this predation pressure increased, they retreated to deeper and deeper waters. Those that remained in the shallow seas developed methods of swimming. They are largely known for being stationary filter feeders, but today there are also free-swimming feather stars. These feather stars started appearing during the Triassic or Jurassic periods, likely as a response to these marine predators. But even just from this, it is clear how much diversity there is in this phylum. Even where they share broadly similar systems, like the water-vascular system or asexual reproduction, the specifics vary a lot between species. Today, there are 5 living classes of echinoderms, which together have around 7,600 species, making it the largest known phylum that is entirely restricted to marine ecosystems. To really understand this diversity, let's take a look at these different classes. First are the crinoids, more commonly known as sea lilies and feather stars. At first glance, they seem almost plant-like. They have a stalk rooted into the sea floor with a system known as the holdfast, and the stalk is topped with the main body and feathery arms. Despite the superficial similarity to plants, it is important to remember that these are still animals. The holdfast does not absorb nutrients. Instead, they are formed of the same ossicles as seen in other echinoderms. The stalk, likewise, has no major organs and is mostly used for support and structure to raise their mouth off the sea floor. Their mouth is on the top side of the body, an interesting difference from other echinoderms, which often have their mouth on the underside. Their gut is U-shaped, so their anus is also on the top side near their mouth. From around the mouth, their arms extend upwards into the water column. Their arms are covered in feathery-like structures known as pinnules. Sea lilies are filter feeders, so the pinnules are used to filter prey out of the water, similar to the baleen of some whales. The oldest extinct crinoids had only 5 arms, but in modern species, these arms commonly branch, often giving them 10 or more. The arms are covered in mucus to trap particles, and cilia, which move the food down the arms and into the mouth. This is the morphology of the basic sea lily, and it is the body shape of most prehistoric crinoids. They were extremely diverse in many eras of the Earth's history, with thick fossil beds composed almost entirely of crinoid fragments, especially from around the Silurian or Devonian periods, persisting through to the Jurassic. But in the Jurassic, we return to the subject of the Mesozoic Marine Revolution, and crinoids are a textbook example of that event's effects on the shallow oceans. The population of stalked sea lilies crashed, and in their place a new type of crinoid arose, feather stars. Feather stars share the same basic body plan as sea lilies, with one crucial difference. The adults no longer have a stalk, and so are no longer attached to the sea floor. This was likely an adaptation to increase movement and therefore avoid predation during the Mesozoic Marine Revolution. It is also perhaps why, in the modern day, sea lilies are restricted to deep water, while feather stars are in the shallows, matching the patterns of that ancient event, as deeper water does not experience the same predation pressures. Today, there are 4 groups of living crinoids. 3 are sea lilies, remnants of their once much greater diversity. The feather stars are in the remaining order, Holothuroidea, but in sharp contrast to the diversity of sea lilies in the past, it is now the feather stars that are far more common. There are around 700 living species of crinoids, but up to 90% of those are feather stars. While adult feather stars themselves are free-swimming, there are still hints to their more stationary past. Feather star larvae typically do still settle onto the sea floor and develop a stalk as juveniles, using this in much the same way as sea lilies. but when they undergo metamorphosis to reach their adult stage, the stalk is shed or detached. Feather stars typically move by using their arms to crawl along the sea floor. They can swim when necessary by beating their arms in coordinated strokes, but this is usually only used to escape from predators and is most effective over short distances. You likely expected feather stars to be able to move, but what might be more surprising is that sea lilies, despite their stalk and holdfast, can also move. They can detach parts of the stalk and use their arms to drag their body across the seafloor, only to re-anchor themselves elsewhere. This happens very slowly and is only rarely recorded. Before 2005, it was believed that they could only move at a rate of about 0.6 meters or 2 feet per hour. But in 2005, Neocrinus decorus, a species of sea lily, was recorded crawling up to 180 meters or almost 600 feet per hour. That is 300 times faster than we thought possible. The truth is that we observe this behavior so rarely that it is hard to know exactly what the limits are. Next are the sea cucumbers in the class Holothuroidea. At first glance, they look very different from most other echinoderms. Instead of a rigid body with obvious arms or spines, sea cucumbers have a soft, elongated body, often compared to a slug or a sausage. But despite this unusual appearance, they still share the same echinoderm traits: fivefold symmetry, a water vascular system, and an internal skeleton made of tiny ossicles embedded in the skin. Unlike sea stars or sea urchins, sea cucumbers lie with their mouth facing forward rather than up or down. Surrounding the mouth is a ring of feeding tentacles, which are actually highly modified tube feet. These tentacles are used to collect food, either by sweeping up sediment or by catching particles suspended in the water. Most sea cucumbers are deposit feeders, slowly ingesting sand or mud and digesting the organic material within it. In the process, they play an important ecological role, recycling nutrients and reworking seafloor sediments. In some habitats, they function a bit like earthworms of the ocean. Sea cucumbers are also famous for their unusual defensive strategies. Some species can eject sticky threads or even parts of their internal organs when threatened. While this sounds extreme, the lost organs can later be regenerated, allowing the animal to survive an attack that might otherwise be fatal. When people think of sea cucumbers, they usually imagine slow-moving animals crawling along the sea floor. And for most species, that image is accurate. But there are striking exceptions that challenge the stereotype entirely. One of the most surprising is Enypniastes eximia, sometimes called the headless chicken monster. Rather than crawling, it swims through the deep ocean, using webbed lobes to move through the water. It still feeds on the sea floor, but only remains there briefly, up to about 60 seconds, before launching itself back into the water column. Even more extreme is Pelagothuria natatrix, looking more like a jellyfish than a sea cucumber. It is the only known species of truly pelagic sea cucumber, spending its entire adult life floating in the open ocean, never touching the seafloor at all. Its body is surrounded by a wide, transparent veil that helps it remain suspended in the water, feeding on particles drifting past, a lifestyle completely unlike what most people associate with sea cucumbers or echinoderms in general. Sea cucumbers also have a strong relationship with humans. In several cultures, particularly in East and Southeast Asia, they are considered a delicacy and have been harvested for centuries, both for food and for use in traditional medicine. However, heavy fishing pressure has led to serious population declines in some regions, highlighting how all organisms can be seriously impacted by human activity. Next are the Echinoidea, with the sea urchins and their close relatives, the sand dollars and heart urchins. Unlike other echinoderms, sea urchins are immediately obvious from their rigid spherical body, typically covered in long spines. This hard shell, known as a test, is formed from tightly fused ossicles, making sea urchins one of the most well-protected echinoderms. Sea urchins show the classic fivefold symmetry typical of the group, but unlike sea stars, this symmetry is not immediately obvious from the outside. Their body is organized around a central axis, with the mouth on the underside and the anus on the upper surface, a more familiar echinoderm arrangement than that seen in either crinoids or sea cucumbers. The spines are one of the most distinctive features of sea urchins. These are not just passive defenses. The spines are movable, connected to muscles and ligaments, allowing the animal to pivot and reposition them. Between the spines are rows of tube feet, which sea urchins use for movement across the sea floor, attaching to the substrate and even limited sensory perception. Some sea urchins even form a loose partnership with other animals, such as small fish and crustaceans that shelter among their spines for protection. Unlike the well-known symbiosis of clownfish and sea anemones, where both partners benefit, the partnership in sea urchins is actually an example of commensalism, a relationship where one party benefits and the other is unaffected. There may be some minor benefits for the sea urchin, but these are poorly documented or speculative. Sea urchins move slowly, but surprisingly effectively, by coordinating their tube feet and spines. They can crawl across rock, cling tightly to surfaces in strong waves, and even right themselves if flipped over. In some species, the tube feet are strong enough to hold onto rocks with remarkable force. At the center of the underside is the mouth, equipped with a complex feeding structure known as Aristotle's lantern, a set of 5 hard interlocking teeth. This allows sea urchins to scrape algae from rocks, grind plant material, and even bore into solid stone. Because of this, sea urchins are often among the most important grazers in shallow marine ecosystems. Their grazing can have dramatic ecological effects. In some regions, unchecked sea urchin populations can strip kelp forests down to bare rock, creating what are known as urchin barrens. In other cases, predators such as sea otters keep urchin numbers under control, allowing kelp forests to flourish. This is a classic example of a marine trophic cascade. When the predators at the top are removed, the grazers flourish to the point that they deplete their own food source, as happened with the purple sea urchin in California following the collapse of sea otter populations. Not all sea urchins look like spiny balls. Sand dollars and heart urchins are highly flattened or burrowing forms, adapted to life in sandy sediments. Instead of large spines, they use short, hair-like spines to move through sand and feed on organic particles. Their bodies are shaped to resist burial and to channel water efficiently for respiration and feeding. Some sea urchins also possess chemical defenses. A few species have venomous spines or specialized pincer-like structures that can deliver toxins, making them potentially dangerous as well as painful to step on. These defenses help compensate for their slow movement and exposed lifestyle. Next is the class Ophiuroidea, containing 2 overarching groups, the brittle stars and the basket stars. While they broadly resemble sea stars, a closer look reveals some important differences. Brittle stars have a small central body with long, slender arms that are clearly distinct from the central disc, unlike sea stars, whose arms blend smoothly into the body. These arms are not just for show. Brittle stars are among the most agile echinoderms, capable of moving quickly across the seafloor by rowing their arms. Rather than relying primarily on tube feet for locomotion, as sea stars do, brittle stars use powerful muscles within their arms, allowing them to scuttle away from danger far faster. Their name comes from the way the arms can break off easily when attacked. This may seem like a disadvantage, but it is actually an effective defense. A predator may be left with a wiggling arm while the brittle star escapes, in a strategy very similar to some lizards that can drop their tails. The brittle star can then regenerate its lost arm later, so the cost is only temporary. Unlike other echinoderms, brittle stars lack an anus. Instead, food enters and waste exits through the same opening, the mouth. Feeding strategies vary widely. Some species scavenge or prey on small animals, while others extend their arms into the water column to filter food from passing currents. Basket stars are a specialized subgroup of brittle stars, and they push this feeding strategy to an extreme. Rather than simple arms, basket stars have arms that branch repeatedly, forming a complex net-like structure. At night, they climb onto elevated perches, such as coral or sponges, and spread their arms wide, creating a living net that traps plankton drifting past. During the day, basket stars usually coil their arms tightly and hide, making them far less conspicuous. This behavior helps protect their delicate feeding structures and reduces the risk of predation. Although brittle stars are common today, they are especially abundant in the deep sea, where they can occur in astonishing numbers. In some deep water habitats, brittle stars are among the dominant animals on the sea floor, forming dense carpets that play a major role in recycling organic material that sinks from above. And then we reach perhaps the most well-known echinoderms, the sea stars in Asteroidea. Sometimes known as starfish, scientists have been trying to move away from this name, so it doesn't cause confusion with people believing they are a type of fish. Sea stars typically have 5 arms, showing the classic fivefold symmetry, but some species can have more. In one extreme case, the Antarctic sun starfish can have over 50. Sea stars move using their hundreds of tube feet that run along grooves on the underside of their arms. Individually, each tube foot is weak, but working together, they allow sea stars to crawl across rock, cling to prey, and even pry open tightly closed shells. Many sea stars are active predators, feeding on animals such as clams, mussels, and other echinoderms. Rather than biting or chewing, sea stars use a method of feeding that is both slow and effective. They grip their prey, gradually tire it out, and then evert their stomach, pushing it out of their mouth and into or around the prey's body. Digestion begins outside the sea star, and the liquefied tissues are then drawn back inside. This unusual feeding strategy allows sea stars to consume prey larger than their own mouth opening. Like many echinoderms, sea stars are well known for their ability to regenerate. If an arm is lost, it can often be regrown over time. In some species, a single arm with part of the central disc can even regenerate into an entirely new individual. There are stories of fishermen attempting to kill sea stars by cutting off their arms, only to accidentally increase their numbers as the arms regenerated into new individuals. However, despite how often this claim is repeated, there is little solid evidence that this ever occurred on a meaningful scale, and it is likely more of an urban legend than a documented historical fact. Ecologically, sea stars can have an outsized impact on their environments. Some species act as keystone predators, meaning their presence helps maintain the balance of entire ecosystems. A classic example involves sea stars that feed on mussels, preventing them from outcompeting other species and dominating the shoreline. When these sea stars are removed, biodiversity can collapse. However, sea stars are also vulnerable to sudden environmental changes. In recent years, outbreaks of sea star wasting disease have caused dramatic population declines in multiple regions. Possibly caused by bacteria, the Pacific coast of North America has been hit particularly hard, wiping out over 90% of sunflower sea stars. This has highlighted how even familiar and widespread animals can be sensitive indicators of broader changes in ocean conditions. Despite their simple appearance, sea stars are surprisingly complex animals. They have no centralized brain, yet they coordinate movement, feeding, and regeneration through a distributed nervous system. Their combination of slow movement, unusual feeding, and powerful ecological influence makes them one of the most distinctive and important members of the Echinoderm phylum. Taken together, echinoderms show just how flexible a single body plan can be. From stalk sea lilies and free-swimming feather stars, to sediment-processing sea cucumbers, grazing sea urchins, fast-moving brittle stars, and predatory sea stars. Each class has adapted the same basic features in very different ways. Their shared traits, fivefold symmetry, a water vascular system, and a skeleton of calcium carbonate, link them as close relatives, but their lifestyles span nearly every marine habitat, from shallow reefs to the deep sea. Despite their alien appearance, echinoderms are some of the most important engineers, predators, and recyclers in the ocean. I hope you enjoyed this journey into echinoderms. If you're interested in the research behind this episode, you can find a document with image credits and sources in the description below. These videos take a great deal of time and research to produce. They will always remain free to watch. But if you would like to support the channel and gain access to new videos a little earlier, you can find a link to my Patreon below as well. And to everyone who already supports the channel, thank you. Your support genuinely helps make these videos possible. If this video sparked your curiosity, don't let it stop here. Share it, talk about it, and keep learning. There's still so much to discover about the world's rare and remarkable species. And the more we understand, the better our chances of protecting them. Thanks for watching.